Am I good to go on the mic here? Welcome to Think Like a CEO and the Northwest Events Show. Has everybody had a good morning so far? Trade show, get down there, see all that cool stuff. So exciting to be together as an industry again. I'm Lynn Edwards. I'm the founder of Proper Planning, a full service event planning company based here in Seattle. We produce events all over the world, and so we are so excited to be back at in-person events. And we've been doing a lot of virtual, but a lot of hybrid, and this one's awesome to see everybody in person. So one of the things that Stuart with the show asked me to do is we wanted to provide some really great content while you're here seeing all the vendors. And I challenged Stuart to offer a track on the business of events. And, you know, many of us for years have been fighting for credibility that this is a legitimate industry, a profession, the designations of the CMPs and CMMs and all kinds of things. And so we really wanted to try to have those involved in the event industry elevate their thought process through this business track. So we have Think Like a CEO. This afternoon will be Think Like a CMO. Tomorrow is the CFO, and then the COO. And it really is try to stretch all of us to think more strategically and more managerial in the C-suite mindset, so that we get that very valuable seat at the table in the boardroom, not just following the directives and administrative work and checking off lists. We want to be involved in the discussion from the highest level. And our process is that we think of every event as a new business. It has business goals and objectives. It has a product. It has a market. It has financials that support whether the business is a success, and really taking the best learnings from other verticals, other industries, and being at that elevated thought process. But really, each event being considered a business. So if you are in charge of an event, you are your event CEO. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panel today to have a great conversation around what it means to be a CEO and think like a CEO. So we've got Victor Kippis with Validar. Those who checked in downstairs, that was you and your Rockstar team, right? The hands-free, amazing check-in process. We've got Angela Dunleavy with Germando, an amazing, prolific catering company here in the Northwest in Seattle. And we've worked with her team many times, but we've got her. She's the Chief Executive Director. So she's... Huh? It is? Oh, okay, we had you. I was trying to make sure I had it correct. She's the CEO, not the CED. And then we got Matthew Donegan Ryan, and he is a tech entrepreneur, been in event tech for many years, and is the CEO of anything that he does. So we're excited to get started. There is a stand-up mic in the back of the room if you have questions. It's fairly small. If you want to yell it out, we probably could hear it. But we want this to be interactive. We want to hear what your challenges might be around elevating into this, again, thinking like a CEO. So the first question I have for you guys is, what's your CEO superpower? What do you think is the differentiator that makes you a CEO instead of a frontliner? What's your superpower?
So if I were to answer that question, I would say enabling my employees and encouraging them to do the work and getting out of their way. So if I hire smart people and if they do their job, I really don't have to worry about things. I would say that's my strength. My team is amazing. And
that is awesome. I'm sure they love that.
I kind of work for them to a large degree.
Well, and I think being in this industry, we may by nature be control freaks and not into delegating or enabling a team. So I think that's a key learning here, is to understand to be in charge of the entire thing. It's letting those teams run and give them all the tools they need and then get out of their way.
The only other thing I'd add to that is I like to overextend my employees a little bit so they don't get bored. So if I hire someone and if their job is account executive, right, I want to make sure the role is challenging for them. So you're going to have a mountain to climb. Mountain climbers seem to excel in my environment and my company, and those are the ones that stay. It has to be a challenge for them or they're going to leave.
Excellent. And Angela, what's your superpower?
So I would also agree that really taking that 30,000 foot view of the organization and what's around you is pretty critical in being leading, the vision of a company. I think that in addition to that, that listening piece is super critical. But for me, I think that there are two things. One, it's being able to compartmentalize and really prioritize what needs to happen, and so that you can then provide good direction. So I think compartmentalization is sort of a blessing and a curse, because it can be fantastic in your professional life and it can be not so great in your personal life. But I do think that there is some piece of you that as you get into the C-suite, you need to stop thinking so in the weeds, and you might want to do that. So as you're growing in your career, if you're finding yourself like, I just can't not care about that event linen, like you need to put that in a box and then take yourself back up to that 30,000 foot level. I think that's really important.
That would be the kryptonite, right? Getting down in the weeds would be the kryptonite versus the superpower. Matthew, what do you think? What's your CEO super? You've been in that role a long time,
Yeah,
different companies.
so for me, it's definitely generating a sense of urgency with the entire team. So I've always worked in extremely competitive industries. So in event tech, there's so many different companies providing essentially, the same solution. So you have to move faster than all of your competitors, and the only way you do that is if everyone on your team is moving at a really high rate of urgency. Like everything that you're doing should be important, and it should be done as fast as possible. And in events, you have to deliver on time. You can't be late with anything. You can't fix something tomorrow when an event's live today. So just creating that sense of urgency throughout the entire team and keeping it up.
And when you're vetting your team, how do you evaluate if they can handle that sense of urgency? I mean, this is, as we all know, this isn't a business that, again, it's not an option to push the event a couple days out because you're not going to hit the launch date. It's got to happen. So is there a certain way that you vet people for being able to
Yeah.
handle that sense of urgency?
So usually if I go into an established team and there's a lot of leaders, usually those leaders have way too many responsibilities. And they have too many direct reports, and they're too much, in the weeds, like Angela says. So I try and look at everything they're doing, figuring out what's the most important, and anything that's not like a tier one from important standpoint, just pass that off and teach them how to delegate, create another set of leaders that can take on more responsibility. So yeah, the last business I was in, I reduced everyone's direct reports by half. And reduce their responsibilities from like 10 things to like 2 or 3, which makes them a lot more efficient.
Excellent. So in the CEO role, I always draw from my days of being an athlete in basketball. It's overtime, 3 seconds left. You're going to take the shot, Lynn. And I welcomed that pressure that it's you. How do you guys, how do you feel about having that CEO role? I mean, maybe ways that you embrace it, or what do you think about being a CEO? What do you draw from to be able to have that role?
So the athlete analogy I like, and I use that a lot, and I like to hire, I call them athletes. And I'll go back to what I said originally. Employees that get motivated from those small wins and the struggle to get that win are employees that I really like at the company. So it's not I want to get that win, I want them to get that win, and then I want everyone to recognize that and we celebrate together. But climbers to me and athletes to me, especially in this industry, are really important, because if you're in events, you're going to have to be comfortable with stressful situations. And I weed out those that are and are not by, I call it dragging them through the mud. You got to put them in stressful situations to see how they respond to that. And you'll learn after 1 or 2 events if they're going to make it or not. They may be brilliant and may be great in certain other industries, but events have a set date. And if things move, the date doesn't. So you're going to have to deal with that.
Absolutely. So in a way, in the sports analogy, you're the coach as the CEO, right? Finding the best players, giving them the best role,
Creating-
testing them, and getting the win together.
Correct.
Nice. Angela, what about you? What do you like about thinking and being the CEO, the responsibility of that?
Yeah, well, I'm sort of I think of myself as a homegrown CEO. I 15 years ago co-founded a restaurant and hospitality group here in Seattle. where when you're starting a business like that, your payroll and the wine buyer and it was restaurants, and so I was the host sometimes. And then as you get into grow the business, which we did, and ended up needing to make more strategic decisions, you continue to grow in that role. And so this is now, I've been at Gourmando for 7 weeks. This is my second external CEO role. And I think that really there's something about the way that I became a CEO that really sticks with how I view my role, which is really based in relationships. So I think you're right. Like this need of urgency is really important. But I also take it as a little bit of a different approach, in which really establishing relationships, whether it's with business partners, with business partnerships we might have, whether it's with event planners in different companies, we really value the relationship aspect of that, and I think you get more done. So I really think about my team, as a community, where what we're doing that day of the event is just as important as what we're doing when we're not at events, which is, cultivating the right culture within our company. And I think that as a CEO, that's something that is really important to me, and is something that is really the CEO's job. And so for me, having started as a founder through this really tight-knit community of restaurants and hospitality, it's making sure that you're always balancing that need for urgency, but also with the really human side of people's lives. We've all been through a pandemic together, and that looked different for a lot of us. And so we're just in a different world right now, and it's just making sure that we're responding to not pre-pandemic days, but what is the new post-pandemic normal of how we work with our teams and with each other.
Excellent. Matthew, so I know you've been involved as a CEO for many companies. It's lonely at the top sometimes in that CEO thinking mode, but what do you like about being the CEO, being the one that's making the calls and the decisions?
Yeah, well, I like to, look at all aspects of the business and be prepared to do any role. So I try and, if I'm working with the sales team, I jump on calls with them. I look at, how they actually, each individual operates their portion of the business. Look for efficiencies from like a first principles standpoint. Like, why are we doing everything the way that we do, and how can we eliminate steps? How can we eliminate processes? How can we eliminate parts or roles or costs? Because a lot of more established companies have done things a certain way for so long, and they've made additions over the years to accommodate, different client requests, and they've really made the business a lot more complex than it needs to be. So I try and simplify it, as much as I can.
I think it's interesting about a CEO role of how much in the weeds training did you get so that you fully understand your team's challenges, but then also elevating yourself out of that, because sometimes the tendency, right, is to go back down to what you're very proficient at. And so it's almost like you have to be your own guardian to make sure you're not getting stuck there. So I guess input on, do you guys cross-train in all the roles? In building the businesses, did you learn all the roles and then that informs you as a CEO?
That's a good question.
Did I stump you? Doo-doo.
No, you didn't stump me, but I will tell you there are things that my team do that I don't understand. There are processes that they go through. I know they need to change, right? But to Matthew's point, how long did it take to complete a project? How many hours and how many resources were associated with that project? These are questions that I'm always thinking about, because those are KPIs and metrics that you want to reduce. Can I knock out 300 events with fewer employees, right? What are my competitors doing? So in a CE role, the thing I really love about it is I'm looking at the C-events and the competitors of the world, watching what they're doing, and I'm excited about figuring out ways to do it better. So I think the KPIs are important to me, but if someone asked me how to provision an event, I wouldn't know what to do.
That's why we need our teams, right? That's why we need them. Okay, next question. You guys enjoy being CEOs. You're rock star CEOs. What would you say is one of the major challenges, and we'll start, Matthew, with you, just around being a CEO of a company? What are some of the maybe top one or two things that just continue to challenge you?
Yeah, I mean, number one is definitely time. There's you always have an unlimited number of things to do, and so especially if you have teams in different time zones, I've always often had teams in Europe and Asia Pacific, and so there's always someone you can be talking to when you're going to bed, and your phone, you got Slack on your phone, and it's blowing up with something that's happening, in like Asia Pac. Sometimes you just have to do that, and then you're neglecting your family, your health, which that's number one toughest thing for me.
Yeah. So if I can go back to the previous question really quickly, I will say that I do think if you are going into a new company or new role, it is super important to sit in the seats for at least a couple of hours in all different parts of your business. So you will find me next Monday morning working in the pastry kitchen at Gourmando, because I think it's really important to understand the perspective of those who are closest to the work. Surround yourself with experts in the field, and then know who's closest to the work and their perspective. I think that sort of ties into what was the question, was like the biggest challenges.
Yeah.
I think that the thing that is really important, that often people don't think about when you're in the CEO role, is you always have to manage this risk and reward. And so really, as a CEO, my first job is to make sure that I'm not putting the company in risk of any kind, or that the company procedurally is not in any risk, whether that's from, and this is globally, right? Like, this is from a financial perspective, a human capital perspective, a business perspective, and then balancing that with the needs of our customers, both internally, so our team, and the needs of our customers externally. So I think it's not necessarily a challenge, but I think that it's really understanding like what's a tension to manage and what's a problem to solve. And so just making sure that you can juggle both, I think it can be one of the most rewarding parts of being a CEO, but it can be a challenge.
Absolutely. And I want to share a resource. I don't remember who sent this to me, but there's an amazing, was a book, I don't know, probably his podcast or ebook or whatever. It's called The E-Myth Revisited. And the E, if you haven't, you guys are shaking your head. Yeah. So that E is for entrepreneur, right? It's that entrepreneur spirit around that. And it's an amazing read or listen, because it talks about the need for the CEOs to be at such a high visionary, mission focused, not in the weeds. It talks about getting the technicians to do the frontline work, and then the managers to make sure it's running, but that you're protecting that time as an executive or an entrepreneur to move the company forward. You hear 30,000 foot level perspective a lot, and it's interesting. What does that mean to you guys? Like, you just hear that you should be thinking 30,000 feet, looking down, overview. But anyone want to elaborate on what that means when you think about, oh, I'm not at 30,000 feet, I'm at 20, or I'm at 2,000?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
because I'm the one who said it, let me just clarify. I think it's both being able to be a master generalist and oversee everything in the company, but it's also being able to see, 2 or 3 years ahead, as well as not getting too stuck on the 2 to 3 years behind you.
Excellent. I like that. Matthew?
Yeah, an example I have, we had a team that was responsible for integrating our technologies with other technologies, and this team, everyone complained about this team. It always took too long to build integrations. The customers were angry because they paid for something that wasn't delivered on time, and the person who led that team, he was so far behind that he was spending all his time helping individual projects, like trying to move things along instead of making the business more efficient. So I went in and I tripled the price that they charged to reduce the amount of work that they'd have. We eliminated a bunch of the offerings just to simplify it, and basically we slowed down the inflow of work, so they were able to catch up. And then instead of being behind on everything and having angry customers yelling at them and angry salespeople and client services staff, they actually got ahead. They became way more profitable. We lost a little bit of the volume of requests that we had, but our revenue over doubled. And it went from a team that was basically losing money for the company to being like a cash generator for the company.
And they could not see that, sounds like, for themselves. They could not see the opportunity
they didn't have the luxury of the time of doing that, when they're getting yelled at from all sides for,
Right.
not delivering on time.
Well, oftentimes you just need to sit down and make the call too, because they're not capable of making that decision on their own. So you are the final decision maker, right? And sometimes you do have to make those hard decisions on behalf of the company, and in the end, they learn from that. Knock on wood, if it's a good decision.
And oftentimes they don't have all the information that informed that decision as a CEO, right? The frontliners, the team members don't have insight to all that went into that executive decision. So I think it's important sometimes to, if you can somehow communicate that to them, this is the why, so they have a better grip on that, but they just are never going to have the same amount of, information flowing in to inform the decision. So they have to trust that CEO. That leads me to a question of what would you like your teams to know about your role as CEO? What would you like them to try to understand about what it's like to be the CEO?
The vision and the mission of the company is really important, that is understood and articulated through all aspects of, our delivery mechanism, right? We do this very, very well, but there's a purpose behind this. It's a conduit to our greater value. I need them to understand why this is important to event producers and what the output is supposed to be. So it's really making sure they understand why we do it, how it helps the client, how it's different, what's our unique value proposition. All of these things are really, really important. And if you get everybody rowing in the same direction, you excel at those things that are important to what you're trying to do. So from a 30,000 foot level, what are your competitors doing? Are you priced right? Is it packaged well? Is the delivery mechanism well? Is someone getting it at a less expensive price, and can they deliver similar functionality? These are all things that are keeping me up all the time. And to your point, I never have enough time in every day to do what I need to do.
I know. I always say it's my name on the shingle, so I'm not sleeping. You guys can enjoy a nap, but I'm not sleeping. I think when you mentioned mission statements, I think those are so important. I know one of my favorites is Harley Davidson. Their mission is we make accountants feel like rock stars, and I loved that in the way that a team can get behind that. Is everything we're doing here at Harley Davidson going to make that accountant be thinking he or she is just this rock star? So as a CEO, the role of having a clear mission where you're rowing, my dad used to say it didn't matter which road you take if you don't know where your destination is. And I really think that's true. So in a role of CEO, I think sometimes it's creating the vision of this is our destination so that we can all row there, and this is why we're going this road versus this other road here. So thoughts, Angela, around like what would you like your team members to know about how it feels to be the CEO, or what's the same or what's different about your experience inside of the organization?
I absolutely agree with everything that Victor said. I think that having that really strong sense of mission, vision, and values really matters for the team to know that you are leading in a way that is consistent to those three things. I think, for me, I said this when I, entered in at Fair Start. I said this when I started 7 weeks ago at Gormondo, that, I come as the person who sometimes has to make the hard decisions, but the person who will always, as much as I can, stand behind my team and really, be the person who will, at the end of the day, take the heat if there's heat to be taken, and also sing the praises when there are praises to be sung. But what I always want my teams to know is that I will come to you with as much transparency as I possibly can, and give you the information that I can when I can, which means that sometimes I can't. Sometimes there are going to be things that are going on within the company that aren't ready for prime time. And sometimes that's really frustrating and hard to wait for. And it's just really important to build trust, I think, in leadership in a company, so that when those times happen, the team can get behind that, which is why I think it's really important. Again, those relationships really matter, because at the end of the day, you don't want to be having a conversation with your 200 and some employees and have them just not trust you. So I think that that's really, and that's not something that you can tell them, like, I want you to trust me. Like, you have to do the things that create that trust. And I think that's what I try to tell teams is, like, I'm going to do my best to do those things, and I'm not going to succeed 100% of the time. And I'm also really open to feedback. And so I think that's really important for teams to know.
Yeah, I'd add to that about the feedback is tell me when I'm wrong. I have less information about your role or your responsibility or your team than you do. So if I make a call and you think it's the wrong call, make a case for why. Like, come up and explain, you said we should do this. I don't think it's correct. We've tried that before, or we've been doing something a different way and it's working really well. Or, provide the evidence why it's the wrong move. Don't yell out in the middle of a company-wide meeting that we're destined to fail. But make the case, and you'll have more information about most of the decisions that affect you than I will. So give me that information, and let's make a case together. Anytime I'm in an organization, I run it as flat as possible. Anyone in any position can reach out to me on Slack or email, or call me at any time. So don't be afraid of going to your CEO, but just make sure you have the evidence or the reasons why you're making that case.
Yeah, and the one thing that I would add to that too that's really important is I really appreciate, I don't know if there are any Amazonians in the room, but I really appreciate the concept and the culture of like the ability to change your mind and change course. And I think if there's good reason to do that, like absolutely, like make the case that like, course correction, like I actually thought that was the right direction for us to go, but I now have new information and I think we should actually kind of take a little pivot or a little bit of a different direction. I would much rather have that happen and say, you know what, I changed my mind or I changed my perspective on this and I want you to consider this thing, rather than sticking with like, yeah, I know I said this thing and that was my idea and I'm going to die on this hill. Like figuring out when, and you can't do it all the time. So you have to make sure it's an important, that you time it well and that you only have so many change your mind chips. But I think that's being open to that feedback is super important.
Yeah, and you're not going to make a huge change, a week before your annual conference. So, the timing is appropriate.
But that vulnerability as a CEO to say, we went through all the processes, we tried it, it's not working. I think that teams respond to the vulnerability, transparency, things like that from a CEO. I think that matters. Anything else you want to add, Victor, on just like what would you like your teams to know about you as the CEO?
I think the word you said is trust. You can't ask for it. You got to earn it. And, enabling them, they're super smart. They know what they're doing. Enabling them, tell them what the roles are and celebrate when they do well. That's what I try to strive to do all the time.
Stock your fridge with some champagne. Okay, you guys, we want to make sure this is interactive. So I've got one more question for the panel, and then we're going to open it up. So be thinking of a great question. Feel free to go to the mic or just shout it from your seat there. Okay, last panel question. How do you protect your thinking time?
You just got to block it out. I generally have a rule where I don't take any meetings on Fridays. So Fridays is when I catch up for anything that I haven't completed that week. I also have a weekly meeting with the leadership team and a one-on-one meeting with each leader every week. And so when they're coming to me, between their weekly meeting, it's like I always tell them, like, is this something we need to solve today, or is it something that we solve on the dedicated hour that we have to you? And that way, instead of them pinging with a bunch of small things that might take 15 minutes to solve, they're coming once a week with a dozen things, and we're taking 30 minutes to solve, all of them.
I love the efficiency of that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think mine is in line with that. So I really sort of live and die by my calendar. And so you have to calendar in that like block time, desk time, block time, whatever it is that you need to work on that week. And I think it is making sure that you have really effective one-on-ones. So knowing what is an emergency and what isn't an emergency, having those really great team norms about, when you need to do, a quick check-in, or if you can wait until you're one-on-one. But I think like the tool that I use and that I've always used from founder to CEO is my calendar for everything.
Got it. If it's not on the calendar, it's not happening. And you're carving out thinking time.
What I tell if it's on my husband, this goes at home too, and any spouses out there can agree. If it's not on the calendar, it doesn't exist, just so you know.
What do you think, Victor? How do you protect your thinking time?
No, I leverage my calendar as well. My thinking time is done because during the day, especially when you're growing a business organically and you're onboarding new resources, you've got to keep your calendar open. So I allow it to be open to folks that need to learn. But whenever I have downtime, I capture that downtime for my thinking time. And it usually ends up being early mornings, off hours, maybe one weekend day a week is where I really start focusing on my CEO type roles. But onboarding, if you do it well, then they don't need you anymore, and all of a sudden you're free and clear.
Nice. Okay, Lyde, one more question. Being a lifelong learner, an industry learner, what's the one best resource for you to get inspiration, information, ideas about being a CEO? This is the speed round. What source do you go to think like a CEO?
Yeah, so for me, it's Twitter and podcasts. So I listen to podcasts of other leaders.
Favorite podcast?
Probably the All In Pod.
The All In podcast. You guys hear that one? All right.
I think for me, it's, I mean, say similar, I mean, in the day-to-day information age, but I think in sort of the innovating, thinking like a CEO, getting inspiration is to join a CEO group. So CEO,
Excellent.
yeah, EO or CEO Connect or YPO.
Excellent idea.
Yeah, and I just follow sources that have the content that is relevant to me. So I don't have a lot of time to read, but snippets are really important to me. Twitter I like as well. I follow-
Reading is not on your calendar.
It is,
Time
but-
carved out for reading.
But you won't see me sitting down reading a novel.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's awesome. You guys, we're going to open it up. Who's got a question for these rock star CEOs? Yeah.
Once you came into your role as a CEO, what was the most unexpected part of your position that you maybe weren't prepared for?
So the question is, when you came into the role as a CEO, what was the most unexpected thing that you weren't really prepared for as the leader?
I'll go first. So I founded the company when I was young and I was a new CEO. Prior to that, I was a sales leader. So I managed, the front office. And the hardest thing for me to understand was how the development team and engineering team work and learning how to navigate their day-to-day activity with the way that I work. The urgency here is different than the urgency here. The mindset here is different than the mindset here. So it took me a couple of years to figure out how to close that gap. And, there's different functions in the business, each of them offer in different ways, and there's reasons why that's good. So learning how to close the gap between development and front office market needs was a learning experience that took me a while to really get a handle of.
Either of you guys want to?
I'll add, there's sometimes you're going to have stakeholders that you're just not going to get buy-in from, especially if you go into a business and there's somebody who's worked there for 20 years and they're very critical at like one little part of the business, and they like the old CEO who maybe founded the company, someone like Victor that they they started with from the beginning. Now somebody new is coming in making changes, and they're just not going to get on board. But you also need that person, in the business, and that's something. I've usually started with either started a company or started with a very early company where you're building the team from scratch, and it's a lot different when you're going into an existing team.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I went from a founder to becoming the CEO of a 30-year-old organization to now becoming the CEO of a female-founded 26-year-old organization. So that all very much remains true. And my last organization was nonprofit. So understanding your stakeholders, I think that and the fact that your modes of communication really have to be very different from stakeholder to stakeholder, because if, in our position, if we're working with line cooks who maybe have not been in the industry for very long or have barriers to employment, even the level of communication in how you're either written to oral, it's all very different, and being able to sort of shape shift between stakeholders and the nonprofit world is sort of to a different level. But that's so true that you just have to be okay with the fact that not everyone's going to be excited about you.
And I think it also is important when you're at that C-suite level to sharpen your presentation, communication skills, to continue to work on those, to find great mentors. If I'm sitting in a board meeting and I watch a team member or a client or someone that's really effective at communicating or telling the story of where are we at, how are we tracking on these things, how are things going? If you watch a CEO, and these guys are all very gifted, to be able to really emulate that and figure out your style as a CEO, how you're going to communicate to stakeholders, how you're going to bring a problem forward. What is your style as a CEO to bring an issue forward to either the stakeholder or the team? So I just encourage everybody to really continue to work on their communication skills and storytelling skills around analytics, around stakeholders, and making sure they get the information that they need in a proper way. I've seen a lot of CEOs be very, very efficient at what they do as a task inside the company, but when they get elevated, they get stumped and they're ineffective around communicating to stakeholders. A lot of times it's over communicating, it's too much information for them to digest. If you're going to a monthly board meeting and you eat, sleep, and drink this event, you know it inside and out. It's this, just throwing up all the details when really, how do you boil that down to be brief, be brilliant, and then be gone from the board and establish that trust so they'd let you run and manage and run the event itself. But I had an opportunity where one of our clients was working with one of the other team members, and I called my team onto the conference call and I said, I want you to hear the communication style that's happening. And I want you just sit on the call, mute yourself, because we're going to have a meeting to talk about how this style works or doesn't work. And it was really informative for the team to listen to that call and go, this person lost them in the first 2 minutes. Oh, why did they lose them? What was the style that was preventing them from being an effective executive briefing them on this particular event? In the case it was. So it's important to continue to sharpen your skills to sit at that's in a C seat. Okay, other questions? Yes.
We're all excited to be back to in-person events, but we also hear the challenges of attracting employees to in-person work. So many of event companies or the service providers for event companies need people on the front line that are in person. What's your role? What's your part in creating a culture that attracts and engages employees to work in person in a work from home world?
Great question. Good to see you. So just so everybody knows, the question was, coming out of the pandemic and bringing people back to an in-person work environment, some of that can be challenging. What are our CEOs doing to attract folks that are willing to come in and be in office?
Boy, that's a tough challenge. I know what you're dealing with, and it's weird. We have the same brands buying from us, but the people buying from us are different people. So it's like our entire database is turned due to the pandemic. And the legacy employees that we had to lay off, if it would have been 15 days, I'd have them still there. It obviously wasn't. So we're onboarding new resources. And it's a weird market. There's people that don't want to work. I had an opening for an operations leader, and I popped it up on LinkedIn, and one day I had 75 applicants. And if you were to look at the education level and the companies they came from, Amazon and Google and Salesforce and Tableau, brilliant people that have great educations that are sitting there looking for work. So I don't know how to answer your question on that, because they may not want to do what you want to do. They may want to have the role they had before. I don't think it's out there right now. So I understand your challenge very well. And it was easy for me to fill that role, right? But if I needed to get a bunch of folks working in an event for 4 days, 30 people, I wish I could help you.
Angela, thoughts on how to enroll these team members?
Sure. I mean, I think, at Gormondo and when I was at Fair Start during the pandemic, we sort of never went home. So I had the luxury of partnering when at my previous organization with my current company on feeding local shelters and community housing and people experiencing poverty and homelessness. So we had work to be done during the pandemic. So there wasn't a full shutoff valve, which makes it a little easier to turn back on. So Gormondo is very much an in-office culture, and it creates so much more deep team connection, so much more innovation. Ideas, just flow a lot easier. It does create a little bit more a habit for just to pop by someone's office, which can be a little bit of a shock when you're not used to that. But I think that the most important thing that we're doing in this post-pandemic age is flexibility. And actually, when I arrived at Gormondo 7 weeks ago, I have some of my team is in the audience, we didn't have a work from home policy. It was just that everyone was at the office. And, I'm a mom. I have two 10-year-old boys, which is why I've lost my voice, because they were sick 2 weeks ago. I'm not, by the way, if you come and talk to me. But we have to be in this new world where we're willing to say, we need you back in the office, we need to be productive, and we understand that you have dentist appointments, that your kids have dentist appointments, that you need to do school pickup, that you know what, having an 8 a.m. meeting is not in anyone's best interest if you are if you are a parent of like school age children, or you're just, I have a problem with 8 a.m. meetings anyway. But I think it's really that, it's just taking this whole new approach to like, there's no reason to be in the office all day long if and chained to your desk. So how can we create flexibility that works for your company? And again, some roles it just doesn't work for. If you're a prep cook, or if you're doing anything in production, that's just not going to work. But what we can do as employers is understand that you have a life outside of our business and be as accommodating as possible to meet employees and meet staff where they are.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I
Matthew.
can't, the event services, I can't really add to that. It's just the job's in person. You have to, you have to be there. In my industry where you're providing technology, virtually all technology roles can be done from home. So there has to be a reason to come into the office. You have to be more efficient in the office. You have to have more fun. You have to get something out of it that you can't get at home. If you're just going in to work at your desk and join Zoom calls all day, there's no reason to be there. And the worst thing is, if you're in an office and you're joining a Zoom call with another person in a different area of the office, that should absolutely be barred from your business.
Totally agree. In the 2-hour commute this morning, I was literally thinking how many Zoom calls I could have taken. But other questions for our CEOs? Yes.
Hi there, guys. Thanks so much for being part of this panel. I'm big on the time blocking thing with you. I think it's genius, but this kind of comes into this work-life balance, where you take the process from work and kind of overlay. How much do you time block your personal and family and other times, things like that? Because I'm finding myself struggling with the 9 to 5 is locked, but then it's all chaos outside of that. Do you take that process outside of work, and how much of it do you take out?
Great question. Thank you for your patience on that.
So maybe I'll start, if you have a global team, I'll have certain blocks for different regions. So I'll have, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., that's when I talk to Europe, and no one from the US can book anything with me from that time. And then 10 to noon, I'll have US meetings, and then I'll block maybe noon to 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock for myself. And maybe I'll, eat for the first time that day, or go work out, or go do something fun. And then I'll have Asia Pac meetings from, say, 3 to 6, and then again from 9 to 10, or 9 to 11 if needed, or midnight if it, sometimes midnight if you need to talk to Asia and Europe at the same time. So you have those blocks and you stick to them. So the only time I will make an exception is to talk to a customer. So if I have an internal team and the internal team says, hey, we want to have this meeting on Friday morning at 11, it's absolutely not. But they say, hey, we want you to talk to one of our top customers who's upset with us. It's 100%. I'm always going to talk to a customer.
You're a well-oiled machine over there. Ms. Gatto's time all blocked out. Angela, what do you think?
I think this is so important for all of us. We have got to prioritize our mental health collectively as a country and a world. So I think you have to take as much integrity in blocking doing the block and tackling of your personal time as you do your work time, in the same way that I think it's really important to have a sort of a mission and vision and values for your own family. And so, that sounds a little cheesy, but we also do that at my house. And so one of the values that is just a non-negotiable, unless things in the pandemic things got a little fuzzy, but we have dinner together every night. It's just what we do. Sometimes it's from 6 to 6:15, because that's as long as I can get my 2 kids to stay at the dinner table. But it is a ritual that we have. And so what are the rituals that you can put into your life and protect those? And then I think it's also, as a mom and a working mom, I talk to my kids a lot about my job, understanding what my job is, and understanding when my job might interfere with, vacations or, special events. And, having been a small business owner and grown a company, they're just used to it in their life. But I think for me, I know that I'm a better leader if I have my own self-care time too. So it's really important for me to get a certain amount of exercise, a week. I'm a skier. So in the winter, it's really important for me to get into the mountains. And so I approach this not as a time management, because I much more value effectiveness over activity. And so if you need to take a walk at lunch, which I often do, because you're going to be more productive in the afternoon, absolutely. And if that means that on Saturdays and Sundays, I will rarely contact my team unless I absolutely have to, because I want them to know that that time is valuable to them. So I'm not a huge, like, I will rarely text my team outside of office hours unless it's really important. I will send an email and get back to them. So you can't avoid it sometimes, but I really try to, because I think that we are in a different world where we cannot expect ourselves or the people who work with us to be robots like we did maybe pre-pandemic. So I don't know. I think you just do it. Like, you just have to figure it out.
And I think the boundary setting, it is, running amok in this business. And I have a client that first, we're just starting the partnership. We got 3-year contract, and she texted me and I responded right away. And then the barn door was open, and it really finally had to just set that boundary and just say, I text her back and said, I'll respond to this in the morning, and just really kind of reeled it in, because she would have when it went through her head, she wanted it on some sort of communication to me, Slack or text or whatever. Now we're all in charge of protecting our own, whether we look at the emails or whether we look at the Slack or the text. But, we have these handy little devices that are attached to us that say they know we're looking at stuff kind of 24/7, but it doesn't have to be responded to immediately. So that's on all of us to manage and also to communicate those expectations. I also heard a great tip from a Nike executive that said, I no longer send any communication over the weekend, because my team is so committed that they will look at it and it'll irritate them that they've got something sitting there from me as soon as it comes in from the exec. But she's like, I just don't do it. I schedule all of them for a Monday morning, mid-morning, not 8 a.m., but a mid-morning send, so that they all push out. I take my time over the weekend when it's quiet to think through what I need to tell the team, but I do not hit send or it doesn't go out. So that's a bit of a tip as a CEO, if you want your employees to not feel like, they're at your beck and call 24/7. You have to manage your own communication as well.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. One of the joys of scheduling things is, as a CEO, you have to make decisions extremely quickly. So if I schedule a message for Monday, which I do a lot, I'll often go and edit it before it actually sends, because I've thought about it some more. It's like, oh, that's kind of stupid, or I thought of something better. So scheduling makes you give it a once over as well.
I'm like the polar opposite of you. So
Victor's team getting stuffed all over.
I'm a little guilty on the weekend thing. So I hear you loud and clear.
That's what your employees have been telling me, by the way.
So I've got to stop doing that. But I like to be accommodating to folks that need help. I start my day at 7 a.m. and we do business in Europe. We do business in APAC, and it usually organically works itself out. I can find time for myself within that, but I like to make myself available to troops that need help. And it tends to be heavy on the sort of account management side of things, right? But I'm very accommodating with my calendar, simply because I know what their calendar looks like. And it's easier for them to fit into mine than it is for me to fit into theirs, I find. So I start at 7, right? At 5 p.m. it usually stops, and then I'll spend some time afterwards and some time on the weekend and time in between to kind of catch up on the stuff that I need to do. I'm very less structured than you, and I might try it.
I'm with Victor over here. I'm 24/7. I try not to be. I've got a client right now in Slovenia. We got an event in a month, and in the UK at the same time. So I've just started getting up at 5 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. because it was just rattling to wake up and try to be 7, 8 o'clock, and all of a sudden the inbox just, you've got 57 emails from this morning over in Europe. It's tough. You also have to be in tune. I think, Angela, what you said is be in tune with your own mental health and what works for you and your family and your boundaries, and taking care of yourself so that you can continue to run at that hot pace.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too, with, talking about like staff will answer your emails. It's also going back to that transparency. And, when I join a new team, I hope I said this to you guys. Like, I may send an email at 9 o'clock at night or on the weekend. I don't expect you to answer me until the business day. And because the reason that I've done that is maybe I have something going on, midday I can't get to, or I need to work it into my own schedule. And it's better for me to fit those couple of things in at times when it may not be the right time for my team. And so I think it's also having good communication with your teams about when you might, like, what the expectation is. Like, I totally hear you, whoever said like no weekends emails to staff. If I have to reach out to someone on the weekend, it's a pretty cringeworthy moment, like, and something's like flooding.
I have a question. So how many in this room are CEOs? Oh, we've got a couple. Excellent. Love that. And yes, CEOs here. Okay. How many feel like they are the CEO in your organization if you don't have the title? Okay, a couple of you for sure. Yep. Okay, good to know. Other questions? We've got about 10 more minutes. Anybody else sitting on it? Amy?
How many event planners are in the room?
How many event planners? Hey. We're CEOs, you guys, just so you know. We're CEOs. We need to be thinking like CEOs.
I will add, in larger companies, I mean, event planners are basically the only people who are truly the CEO of their area of the business. They usually need very little buy-in, from outside stakeholders when it comes to things like budget and how events are executed. So it's definitely the most independent role in a lot of companies.
It is, but I find it interesting because you always have a boss. I've said that to I'm the owner of the company. You always have a boss, whoever the clients are, whoever the stakeholders. And I do think that the reason we wanted to do this track was that you need to be thinking like the CMO, or we're having a great conversation tomorrow with Brett from SH Worldwide about finances and how if you're not a budget person, you still, in your role as the planner, are now the CFO that has to report out numbers, projections. We got to cut the budget by 10 million. What do we do? You are it's interesting because I really believe in the event planning world that our toolbox covers all of these C-suite things at some point or another. And so
I have another question for the event planners. Who in the room that's an event planner believes their organization recognizes the true value you bring to that company?
a few, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I will say, I've been doing this 30 years. It's not my natural hair color. 30 years in the event business. And I'll tell you, striving for legitimacy has been a challenge in the events industry. I will sit down at an event and have someone say, "Oh my gosh, you're a professional event planner? I planned my daughter's wedding. We should work together." Literally, like, instantly they're a professional event planner. Getting your designation, your CMP or whatever, I say to people, "Oh, you're a professional event planner? Like, do you know how many gallons of coffee or cups in a gallon? Do you know how to ship internationally? Do you know how to do you know how high a screen should be off the floor?" I do. This is the difference. I'm a CPA, you're H&R Block, submit your own taxes. Not to, but it's to establish this is a profession. If you decide to sit for the CMP and you get, back in the day, I took it in like 94, there's only 4,000 CMPs. They sent me the vocabulary book and it was no joke this high. And I was like, wow, we speak our own language in this business. This is like, and you would not go to your CPA and kick him out of the chair and start doing your own taxes. Why would you hire a CPA? And I've said that to clients before when they really want to insert themselves of like, I really want blue linens. Great, we're going to figure out your blue linens. But right now, I'm asking you, why are you even having this event? Is it a spend? Is it a revenue generator? Like, I need a lot of information as the CEO to understand what your goal of this company/event is. So I think striving for that professional credibility as event professionals is a tough, anytime you can educate people about it, go for it. Don't tell them they're H&R Block, but however you decide to establish that. Yeah, questions?
Yeah, so I'm the same age as you, Lynn, roughly, and I've been in the event world forever.
180 event years? That's what I am.
At least. And Angel and I work together. We've been in the event world forever, and we have had to, since the pandemic, we had to completely shift to digital. So we're talking about, setting up an event like this, going to managing events behind your screen on Teams. And so I guess my point is just the fact that an event planner can do that, from working with a hotel and having them do all But it's really interesting how the event world has changed.
And it's in our DNA. I really believe as event professionals, it's in our DNA to ride the wave of change. You know, thank goodness we weren't people who've been doing, you know, I mean, stuck in a rut. We're whatever. We handle curveballs on a daily basis. But I think you're right. We've been through a lot. I'm tired. I need a nap. I need to put that on my schedule, I guess. And there was another question or comment back in the back of the room? Yes.
Hey, Lynn, good to see you.
Yeah. Hey, John.
So John Chen, CEO for Engaging Virtual Meetings. This is my 26th year of being a CEO.
Whoop.
And I really wanted to ask the three of you, or the four of you, actually, this is actually for Lynn too, right? And it's good to see Angela. I know I've been an EO with Cormando, and of course, Matthew, just meeting Victor, enjoying listening to you. This question is for you. CEOs make decisions, and quite often they make hard decisions. I would just love some insights. What's the hardest decision you had to make over the last 3 years? And I'll just share one, which is one of my top teammates, who is my virtual producer, had a life-threatening liver medical condition right in the middle of the season, and I had to deal with that. I'd love to hear what the four of you dealt with this, and more importantly, how did you deal with it?
Downsizing during the pandemic tore me apart. Absolutely tore me apart. Those people worked so hard. They were so good, and I had no choice. That was the hardest thing. I'll never, ever want to have to go through that again. Bar none. The hardest decision.
Yeah, I mean, during the pandemic, I sort of have flashbacks of 2008 and 2009 because that was pretty traumatic too, and having to lay people off and cut people's insurance and all the things that were horrible. You know, I think the things that are really hard for me as a CEO are things that really impact my team. So when the team is going, you know, in my previous role, there were a lot of people who had been in recovery. So for me, I think, and this industry, I think, can be pretty tough on people who are have substance abuse disorder. I think that's the hardest thing is when I have team members who are struggling with mental health or substance abuse. That always hits me the hardest.
Yeah, definitely layoffs are really, really hard. Usually when you think you should lay somebody off, you definitely should, and you're doing it way too late. You know, it should have been done earlier. But often
I find that with firing people, but not laying people off.
yeah, same thing. I mean, if you're transitioning someone out of the organization, right? And lots of time, like, this might be a friend of yours. This might be somebody you worked with a long time, somebody that your personal relationship will essentially end, which is a really tough thing to do. But if it's the best thing for the business, it's a decision you sometimes have to make. Often in my career, I've waited, too long to make that decision, and every time it's been the wrong. Waiting has always been the wrong decision, and I continue to make that mistake. So it's definitely the hardest one.
It's definitely the hardest. And I think for me, middle of the pandemic, we switched very quickly to virtual. We did 80 virtual events the first year we were in full sprint. And I had to decide to care for my dad, who had cancer for almost 8 months while running the business. And I think that we all need to remember that we're not saving lives in this business. It's important. It's great. We gather people, and it's a joy and a privilege to gather people to do what they do. But to make time for my life when it wasn't an option to keep the pedal down, and I'm like, these guys have that schedule working. I was on a Zoom call training speakers on how to join a virtual platform, and I hear my dad, "It's lunchtime." I'm looking for the mute button, trying to understand. Here I am spinning a plate of trying to keep the business afloat in a most challenging time of no gathering and having to deal with a personal health issue. So I think it's, as the person who's at the helm, that's when your team needs to be ready to step up, and you need to trust them to do that so that you can take care of. So I just think it goes back to your team members and your team, and you're the coach. And if you need somebody to sub in as the assistant coach, train them up, let them be ready to take the reins of CEO if they need to, would be my answer. So we're almost at time here. I would just like to thank all of you for your insight, your information. I would like to encourage everybody in the chairs to be putting your CEO hat on, whatever that looks like, CEO goggles, I don't know, visor, whatever you choose, but to be elevating your thought process and be thinking strategically, creatively, financially, and as a leader of your event or your organization. So thank you for joining us. Are you guys going to stick around for a few minutes up here? If there are any questions, you can come on up.